Intentional reflection is, I think, a great and powerful tool that each of us can do as individuals to really reflect as to what could I do personally to be more inclusive to others. And my last question to both of you is, what can each of us do to truly transform St. Ben, St. John's into a more inclusive community?
It's a great question, Cindy. When I think about the amount of work it takes to shift large organizations like the College of St. Benedict, St. John's University, I'm sure that it will be a multi-layered effort that happens in different ways for different individuals. So if I'm trying to sort of think, what can everybody do? What's a sweeping way to characterize what each person could do? Because our role is going to be different. One of the things that I think each person could do is think, when I am in a group, in a moment on our campuses, I know that the differences we have here have different social powers attached to them. I know that. So I'm going to make the choice to privilege the newcomer. It's like a preferential option, if you will, for that newcomer. Not because each perspective in the room is unimportant. Each perspective is important, but they're already socially weighted, and the power is already hanging around the status quo, where those who can affiliate more with the old comers. That's not a word, but that's where the power is. So I think each person could make a difference if they say, I'm going to privilege the newcomer. And sometimes this newcomer has been here a long time. That's tricky. So let's imagine that we have a particular office on campus where someone working in the office has recently started identifying as openly queer. And they've been working there for 20 years, but this has newly become part of the culture of the place, that they could be present to each other in that way. So that openly queer perspective is the newcoming perspective in that case. Or let's say that someone in your student club is actually a senior. They've been there quite a while, but they just went on an amazing alternative break experience trip or a study abroad. They came back a different person. They have different perspectives now. This person is now newly different in the group. So I don't just mean look for the students moving onto campus at the beginning of each fall semester, although I do mean them too. And I do mean the new faculty members and the new staff members. But there's also a way that there's newness right there that we can sometimes overlook. So if someone says, I'm going to privilege the newcomer, I'm going to make sure their voice is heard when we do this intro activity. I'm going to make sure their voice is heard when we decide on our policies. Sometimes that is going to mean your own voice. Because for some of the people who are thinking, what can I do? That person is the newcomer, or their perspective is the new one. So when that happens, I think the person, in order to commit to transformative community, gets special encouragement to say, this is not the moment you need to let other people speak first. This is not the moment that you need to be deferential. This is the moment to own your voice and speak it. When it's safe, when it's powerful. Oftentimes the structures are so heavy that not every newcomer even feels safe doing that, and that people will have to trust their own guts in that. But when it's possible, this sort of preferential option for the newcomer would say, if that is you, own it, speak first, speak again if they don't hear you, find a way to have that voice heard. And then for those who feel that they're not in the newcomer perspective, to put themselves in what Benedict's rule would say is first and foremost, and that is a position of listening. So I think that privileging of the newcomer is a thing that each person could commit themselves to, even if the person is new. That's how I would get started with that.
I think we could do, to build off of what Anna said, I think we can do a couple of things. So the other aspect of the newcomer feeling able to share their voice is for those around the table to be willing to listen and to be a witness to the voice of that newcomer. So when someone says, this is my experience, our job is not to talk them out of that experience. It's not to critique that experience. It's not to judge that experience based on our experiences in the world. It's to be a witness to their experience. And sometimes that's incredibly painful to do when you hear about how your actions, how my action compromise someone else. That's hard to hear. But you have to be a witness to that and not try to convince people that their experience isn't theirs. So I think that's the other part. When you're around that table and someone uses their voice, it's not to discount it. And that's I think that's a natural human tendency everywhere. We want to say, oh no, it's not because you're different, it's not because of X, it's not because of Y, when the reality is sometimes it very much is X or Y or difference. And we have to be a witness to it, because when we discount that person's experience, we're discounting their humanity, we're discounting their right to their experience, and that's painful in and of itself. I think there are 2 or 3 other things we could do, we have to do. We have to be vulnerable to this work, which means we have to experience the pain and the discomfort of this work, and it will be uncomfortable. And I would argue should be uncomfortable for all of us. If we're doing this work well, if we are transforming, then there will be moments of discomfort. We will hear about what we've done. We will hear about structures that we've been able to take advantage of that have harmed someone else. And that's going to be difficult, and that's going to be uncomfortable. But you've heard me say, there are people on our campus who are comfortable often because we don't examine those structures. Yes. And that becomes our work. Now, to do that, from an administrative example, there's data that might make us uncomfortable. Indeed. About who's successful and who's not successful in our institutions. No one wants to look at that. There's not a person back there saying, I want these folks to be, unsuccessful, but it's going to hurt to look at. But it is our job to embrace that discomfort and unflinchingly look at that data or those experiences. I think that the last thing that's really important is you have to engage in the work. It's simply not enough to watch other people do the work and then critique or complain about it or be dissatisfied. You have to be willing to step into the arena, if you will, to be a part of this. And there are so many opportunities, as Anna has described, to be engaged in this work in so many different ways. But you have to say, I'm going to make myself vulnerable to this experience, and that is exactly what it will take.
I thought of a few things as you were speaking, Mary. The very last thing you were saying about vulnerability. You and I both are aware that there are some for whom the cost of that vulnerability is higher. And so I just really hope as we step into this work that some of us positioned in the institution can be ready to help those for whom there's a higher cost to this vulnerability, who don't have the cushion, the sort of cultural cushion to make taking these risks safer for them. So I'm just thinking about those individuals and some of those newcomers and wondering how we can support that, because it absolutely will take that vulnerability. And I know for me, sometimes this has meant I've really messed up too. So when I hear you talking about someone sharing their story, I know I have responded unhelpfully or from my own misunderstanding. And I know as I keep doing the work, it's going to happen again. So part of it is the courage to mess up and look for forgiveness from others and just own that if we're talking about transformational daily change, we cannot know. We don't have a script. So we're going to make mistakes and need to forgive one another sometimes. And again, for some people, the cost of that is going to be higher. I worked with one of the groups on campus recently for this through our Becoming Community work. And while I was there, I was really impressed with that group of people because they did become quite vulnerable. And we had one morning together, but they did do that. And it was not easy for them, probably for me either as a facilitator, but with them. And so thinking of them, I think to myself, one of the ways that we're vulnerable is we're willing to have conversations with people when we know we don't have a response. That's very scary. It's easier to say, I'm going to do these conversations with all these people, and each time they finish, I will say. But if you're really inviting someone to show up, then you can't know your response, and that is so frightening because then we're not on our game. It's like we didn't take the professional training for this. So the posture I have in my hand for people is just sort of this one. It's enough to just listen to someone, and you don't have to have the cool response or the savvy response or the smart thing to say. You can just listen to them and show them you were listening, not looking at your phone or your clock, and not even having anything to say afterward, but thank you, I heard you. That's enough. And if that's all we have to have permission to do, then we can take this courage to listen to things that we don't know how to listen to, because we don't have to feel like, okay, they do their part, then I say my fancy thing. We don't have to know in advance what we're going to say or do here, except that we're deciding to listen and to be vulnerable, as you were saying, and give each other permission to not know where this is all going to lead. That's hard for an institution. I give you credit for being the leader of an institution who's willing to let an institution walk into that kind of unknown. It's not an easy thing to write a structural report on. We will be exactly here in 15 years. Well, we're going to be perpetually working on inclusion. So our 15-year mark is a moving thing. Yeah, that's brave, and that's the kind of school I want young people to learn at. So I'm really glad we're doing it.
Thanks, Anna. That's the beauty of becoming community. We are all going to fall short of witnessing and courage and vulnerability and caring and compassion. We will have moments when we fall short. But because the active word is becoming,
right.
Every day we
There's
get a
grace.
new opportunity, and there is grace in that. And I'm delighted to be doing this work with you. I'm excited.
That's mutual.
I'm excited.
Cindy too.
I want to thank you, President Hinton, for inviting us into the space and
Of
for your
course.
time this morning. And
You're
Anna,
welcome.
Mercedes, thank you so much for agreeing to do this interview. It's been a pleasure being with you both this morning.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Cindy.
Cindy.
Thank you.
Thanks for your work.